And we're live.
Hello and welcome to another DML Commons webinar. This is the first webinar of Unit 3 for the DML Commons Professional Pathway. The unit's entitled, If at First You Don't Succeed, Try Again, or the Ins and Outs of Academic Writing and Publishing. The unit for the next 2 weeks will explore issues around writing, including struggles of writing and publishing interdisciplinary work and writing for non-academic audiences. Today we'll be talking about writing and publishing for academia and beyond, including approaches to collaborative and interdisciplinary writing, tips for writing improvement, and publishing. I'm Crystle Martin, a postdoctoral researcher at the Digital Media and Learning Hub at the University of California, Irvine. And I'll be co-facilitating the webinar today with Amanda Ochsner from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our panels today are AliciaMagnifico, Danielle Herro, Ramy Holden, and Mimi Ito. And I'll let them introduce themselves now. How about we start with Amanda?
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Oxer. I'm finishing up my PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My research focuses on the experiences of women in game design and sort of what their learning pathways and professional trajectories are. And I'm really excited to talk about interdisciplinary publishing and collaborating and all that good stuff. So thanks for having me.
Alecia?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is AliciaMagnifico, and I'm an assistant professor of English teaching at the University of New Hampshire. My research focuses on how people learn to write in a variety of media, online and offline. And lately, I've also been teaching English teachers, so thinking about how to integrate digital composition and writing more cohesively into different classrooms. Thanks for asking me to be here, and I'm looking forward to chatting with everybody.
Danny?
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Dani Harrow, an assistant professor of digital media and learning at Clemson University. And my research focuses on ways to move game-based learning into classrooms. And I also do quite a bit of work with teachers wanting to integrate STEAM units in their classrooms in ways that we measure collaborative learning with students who are working in STEAM classrooms.
Mimi?
Hi everyone, I'm Mimi Ito. I'm at the Digital Media and Learning Hub at UC Irvine. I'm an anthropologist. I hang out with kids on the internet and figure out how they learn. And I guess I'm here because I've done a lot of big collaborative writing projects and tend to publish in odd places.
And Ramy?
Hi folks, my name is Ramy Holden. I'm an assistant professor of information and learning technologies at the University of Colorado in Denver. My research occurs at the intersection of the learning sciences and teacher education, where I design experiences and also learning environments for both pre-service teachers and in-service teachers across multiple settings. So focusing on sometimes games, sometimes mobile learning. And again, I'm excited to be not only with this panel, but with everyone who's watching.
All right. I'm going to kick off our conversation by asking about your guys' process for collaborative writing. So I just want to hear, like, how do each of you approach writing when you're writing with colleagues or collaborating with other people, and what tips or tricks would you offer to young scholars who are just kind of starting out learning how to collaborate successfully with other scholars? Let's start with Ramy. We'll go in opposite order of introductions.
Sure, that's great. Thanks, Amanda. So one aspect, certainly there are many tools for writing collaboratively, and sure people are probably using, well, we're using Etherpad right now and Google Docs. But what I've found to be helpful when writing collaboratively with others is setting clear expectations for what that collaboration should look like. So certainly deadlines are helpful, but even sending folks drafts, even handwritten notes, sometimes through the mail, sometimes scanning those, but really being very clear about how that collaborative writing is expected to be transparent, is expected to align with certain roles, and then ultimately is aligned to a specific inquiry question. We're not just writing together to potentially have fun if we're writing a research paper together. So expectations are really critical.
Mimi, do you have anything to add about your process for collaborative writing?
Yeah, I really agree with the general point about expectation setting and just making sure that everyone's on the same page, not only in terms of like the nitty-gritty, what are we trying to accomplish when kind of things, but just the culture of collaboration and the expectations of, you know, how you handle responsibilities and taking credit for things and deciding whose ideas they were. I mean, collaborative writing is incredibly difficult, actually, and it can result in a lot of hurt feelings and, you know, feeling like you've been ripped off or somebody, you know, who's first author. And there's a lot of sensitivities that are just really good to be aware of up front going into a project. I was trying to think back because I've sort of been in the position of orchestrating lately these large writing projects that include a lot of folks at different levels of seniority. And so I've been on that end, but then I do remember starting out, you know, I was a junior person collaborating with more senior folks, and, you know, we just set some ground rules, like every collaborative group is going to be different, but, you know, it was really helpful working with scholars who were more experienced in collaborative writing early on. And, you know, one of my first papers I wrote with some colleagues at Xerox PARC, we just said up front, you know, first author means that you're the one who's going to wake up in the morning and worry about this and get this done and keep pushing this project forward and nag everybody. And it may not be about like the actual volume of writing, but it's that responsibility for getting the project completed. That was first author, and then we always did alphabetical after first author, and that's kind of been the practice I've stuck to. I'd be curious what other people do, like in that ground setting for those sensitive topics about authorship and credit, and, you know, the data that gets, whose data gets used. You know, the credit is, authorship is one thing. The other is, you know, just managing the sensitivities about that are different depending on discipline, about when you publish something, when is it yours. You know, some disciplines, they don't let you republish. Like if you publish something in a collaborative venue and then it becomes difficult to publish later in a single author venue. I mean, these are just things that people should be aware of. Now, those are the downsides, but I'll have to say the upsides of collaborative writing are, it's just so worth it, because the work you get done and what you learn through that process is just unbelievable. Like, I would never have been able to, you know, do the kind of range of projects and have the range of perspectives that I do on my work if I didn't really get in the weeds and write collaboratively with people, because that's when you're forced to hash out your differences and frameworks and the rubber really hits the road. So those are my 2 cents to start off.
I can jump in if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great, Dan.
Okay. And well, I certainly agree with everything that Mimi said, and I do agree that it is a bit tricky. I think collaborative writing is really fruitful, but it is really tricky, and I think you have to establish who's going to do what initially, and usually, at least for me, it's been at the end of data collection, and when we just sort of begin the analysis, we sit down and talk about what we're seeing initially and the types of writing we'd like to carve out of, for lack of a better word, carve out of the data set that we have. And then we usually even talk about the sorts of journals that we're going to aim for or shoot for. And then we talk about capacity, who can do what. So we usually establish right away. For me, it's tended to be with 3, so a group of 3, and sometimes we have grad students working with us. So it tends to be positioning for first, second, and third authorship, and then workload after that. The other thing is I'm usually pretty quick to jump in when I'm working with two other collaborators when I really feel that my place is third author. So for example, a recent publication that we're working on, a conceptual paper, the first author is really grounded in the work and is doing just what Mimi said. She's doing the kind of nudging each week, moving the project along, pushing this out. She did a lot of the framing. The second author created a model for our conceptual piece, and I knew there would be a great deal of work, and she had the expertise that would go into that. I feel like I can contribute to the paper. I understand the conceptual process. I attend the meetings when we talk about it. I flesh out pieces, but I'm definitely third author on the paper, and that was established right away. So again, I think part of it is you have to be at the point in your data collection and analysis where you have that conversation before you really start writing. And then we'll even talk beyond that. Okay, so how much work have our grad students done, and where do they belong in this piece? Or do we have a data set where a grad student could actually, we could help them write a piece as first author, and what does that mean for the rest of us? So anyway, that part has been, I think, it has worked pretty well because we all know the expectations. The other thing I would say that I've learned, and I'm pretty early in my career, I've just finished my 3rd year, I figured out quickly, well, probably not fast enough, but somewhere in my 2nd year, I figured out exactly who I couldn't write with, because they may have been fantastic scholars, but they were not, even though they said they were going to collaborate, they were not going to sit down and meet any timeline, even if we had established that. So I removed myself from any projects where I felt we went on for 6 or 8 months and we just weren't getting much. So that was kind of a hard lesson for me. I wish I had not waited so long before I realized I just can't write with these people, because they're not going to write. They're just not going to. So, I mean, that's the other thing to navigate.
And what advice do you have for gracefully removing yourself from a project that maybe isn't going so well?
Yeah. Well, I try to be diplomatic, but so we have, usually with a Google Doc, we have an outline. This is what we said we're going to do. We have the timelines. And for me, it tends to be a couple of gentle reminders that this timeline, this is past. And then we get to a point, usually it's through IRB, where they say, can we close this? Are you done with this data set? And that happens, at least at Clemson, happens fairly quickly, within 9 months. And that's really a nice time to say, we haven't gone anywhere with this. So I'm going to close this because it seems that nobody's interested in continuing on this project, right? So that we do it sometimes that way. Otherwise, they'll ask me to do another piece, and I'll just say, of research or writing, I can't do that. It doesn't seem that our writing styles work that well together. It's only happened a couple of times, but it's definitely happened. And for me, to get tenure, I have to pay attention to those things. And they may do fabulous work with other people, but I can't do that.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's really important to suss out early on in a project whether there's somebody who really is committed to getting it done. Because we often start a lot of projects with really good intentions, and everybody's like, oh, it'd be cool to work together. And it's great. You should start projects with good intentions, even if, I mean, don't beat yourself up if these things die a quiet death. I mean, that's also part of just what happens when you're testing things out. But a project won't get done if at least one person isn't really super committed and making it a priority. So just, you know, suss that out early, and then don't invest in a lot of time unless you're the one who's really committed to getting it done, or there's somebody else. I mean, if you keep pouring dribs and drabs of energy in a project that no person is really going to push forward, that's when, you know, your red flag should go up. And just, you know, it's fine to not, you know, to kill projects too. I mean, that's part of the process.
Yeah, just to add to what Mimi said right there, I really feel like, and to what Danny said as well, I feel like it's really important to try to do something with people before you start writing together, or to do some kind of a small project, if at all possible, before you take on something big. Because, I mean, as everyone has said, collaborative writing can be so fantastic. It can be so invigorating. You can learn a lot, but it can also be really difficult. And I know in my most successful collaborations, those are with people with whom we bring different strengths, and we know what those strengths are. And we've had, in the most successful collaborations, we've had conversations about, okay, so like Danny was saying, you know, maybe someone's really good at model building. Maybe someone's really interested in this particular kind of data analysis. Maybe I'm really interested in the writing. But those things can take a while to develop. So I would definitely say that one piece of advice that I have is to try to do some kind of a small project, do a conference symposium, do a conference paper first before you jump into something like co-editing a book or writing a book, because those kinds of big projects can get really, really straining when you're working with people who have different work styles, and they're harder to kill too. It's not so hard to kill the conference the conference paper after and just say, okay, so we tried this thing, it didn't really work out, let's not pursue it further. It's much harder to say that when you've got a bigger project. So that would definitely be a piece of advice that I have learned both in good ways and in bad ways. Yeah.
So I really appreciate hearing what everyone has to say, and it has me now thinking of a few additional thoughts. And one is that writing is a public process. And there's this kind of idea in academia that we're the lone scholar at our computer just banging out these ideas in isolation from everybody else. And this question of how we collaborate in a writing process, for me, is a reminder that because our writing is public, we actually collaborate with other people beyond just our immediate team. And so I might be co-authoring a paper with 2 or 3 people, but in that process, we might ask some questions of a journal editor or the book editors, who might provide either some formative feedback along the way or definitely steer us in one direction as opposed to the other. And I think we all have those kind of critical friends where we say, yeah, this draft isn't quite done yet, but we really need some feedback on this section around methodology. And we'll kick it out to someone, and we really trust their opinion and their feedback, and that changes how then that internal team writes. And so in hearing what everyone says, I think that an expectation that I hope is also clear, at least with the teams I work with, is that it's a transparent and public process. And even if there are 2 or 3 or 4 authors on the paper, it's the result of a process that has a kind of broader network and a broader set of contributions to move that project forward.
I think you make a really good point, Ramy, that sometimes somebody who's not an author, like an editor or a colleague, might be able to step in and provide some really useful feedback to sort of keep things flowing for the actual authors, particularly if maybe you're stuck or if there's some kind of conflict. I think that's a really great point. It looks like we have a question from the Etherpad specifically around expectations and responsibilities around authorship. And so I think that's something we've kind of covered on and off. But one thing I know that confuses some young scholars is sometimes authorship is determined specifically in terms of who's going to be doing the most writing, and other times other parts of the process are taken into consideration. So who collected the data, right? Who structured the study, things like IRB. So I'd love to hear from you guys in terms of how you typically handle both the writing in terms of authorship, but also taking other parts of the process into consideration.
Yeah, I'll jump in just because I think this is hard, and I think there's a lot of variability actually in how people handle it. So I think that's where the expectation setting is important, that you should have an explicit conversation, especially if you're publishing with your academic advisor or somebody more senior than you. I know I talk about this with my colleagues a lot, and there's a lot of variability in how the senior scholars treat publishing with their grad students and postdocs. Now, I won't, make a value judgment about it, but there is a spectrum from folks who really go out of their way to try to promote first or single authorship among their junior scholars that they're mentoring, and those who sort of feel like, on the other side of the spectrum, that because they're part of the same research group, they should be named in all the publications. So, this is just it's a expectation and culture thing that is just variable in my experience. So, I think from the point of view of a junior scholar, it's just it's important to know what that expectation is for whatever research group you're involved in, and it's also, I guess, now that I'm sitting on the other side of the fence, I think it's also important just to appreciate what your advisors are doing for you on that front. And, sometimes, to be quite honest, it's like, there's often sort of a, I don't know if defensiveness is the right word, but these conversations can be difficult and fraught, right? So I think both the senior scholars and the junior scholars have to be generous in that conversation, and it's important to acknowledge on both sides what each side brings to the table. And I think that I have seen, breakdown situations where that hasn't happened because one or the other party, just like the junior folks feel like they're being taken advantage of and the senior folks feel like they're not being appreciated for what they brought to the table. And so with collaborative work, I think, or interdisciplinary work in general, just appreciating, starting with a stance of appreciation that everybody brings something different to the table is really important. And then you can start hashing out, like, well, then given that and the different needs of different folks, who should be named in what order. So, like in my rubric, I feel like because junior folks need to have a stronger need to have their name first on a publication, like that is a priority, right? To get, like, I don't really need any more publications in my roster. Like, I don't, it's not as big a value for me. So all of these things just need to be taken into consideration, and I don't think there's any single right way to do it. But I think coming in with a set of values around appreciating diverse contributions and diverse needs is really, really critical to success.
All right, I think we're at about a third of the way through, so I want to move us on to talk about writing for non-academic audiences. So I'd love to hear from each of you on what your advice is for writing for people who aren't academics. And I know for some of you, you're experts in working with teachers. Others, write for more mainstream audiences. So I know each of you have your kind of own expertise. So if we could hear from you on, who you have experience writing for and what your advice is for effectively reaching that type of audience. How about, okay.
Sorry, I'll take Danny, please. Danny, go ahead.
Oh, okay, and I'll save plenty of time for you, Ramy. I was going to say some of the things that I know that I've done when I'm writing for teacher practitioners is I focus my attention to research to practice journals, which are very important. I don't focus as much time in some of the state level journals, but I actually know that a number of our faculty in early childhood and literacy actually write for that audience. So journals like Theory into Practice. I wrote a piece for, and that's a highly regarded journal, and they are really looking for, and the editors really came down on any of the pieces in this particular issue that were too research focused, where it was all about academic language and that sort of thing. So I think research to practice journals are one avenue. The other thing is, so some of the other non-academic audiences, which I guess are really academic, but it's a different piece, sometimes a white paper. So if you have this idea and you want to move it forward, it's not looked at from a university standpoint in the same way the journal article is, but a white paper can be really effective in getting your ideas out there broadly and saying, here's the problem, this is what we would like to do, and here's how we're going to approach it through research, and here's our strategy. And then I think the other way to do that is if you are in academia long enough, it might not be in your first or second year, but if you're asked to write a piece that introduces a concept or a journal or something, if you're on an editorial board, sometimes they will ask you to write a piece that is going to be a little bit more practical that will tie all of those articles together. I certainly know a lot of academics, and then maybe somebody else can speak to this, who write prolifically on blogs, and so that they certainly reach a large audience. And even another thing, and then I'll stop talking, some of the journals that I look at that for me would be a really great place to publish my work are going to allow other types of media, right? So it's going to allow me to embed video clips. It's going to allow me to really show what a multimedia piece might look like. So I keep all of those things in mind, but in all honesty, if I'm going to be practical about my tenure, I have to pay attention to academic journals as well. So I think when I first came in, I was confused about what that meant when they talked about publication, and they really wanted us to hit this really broad audience, but they made it very clear if we were focusing all of our time in some of the pieces that I've just talked about, that was not going to get us tenure, at least at my institution. So I think you certainly have to kind of straddle that line.
Ramy, I mean,
yeah, I would add to I would certainly add to everything Danny said. I agree, completely. And so there's a really healthy tension there because I'm a former middle school and high school teacher. I've worked now as a teacher educator for a number of different institutions, And I spent a lot of time with practitioners, with either K-12 teachers, with some pre-service teachers, as well as administrators in public schools. And in spending time with them, you learn what are they reading, what publications matter to them, what kinds of research to practice scholarship that is written in different kinds of academic language, to borrow Danny's term, really are going to help inform either the ways that they think about problems or how they begin to translate some of that into whatever their practices might be. And so I think that that's a really important tension that we in academia struggle with, particularly as perhaps public scholars, public intellectuals. You know, are we writing, as a teacher educator, for example, am I writing for the top tier teacher education journals and trying to publish there that will mostly be read by other teacher educators or researchers in higher education who have an interest in certain topics, like perhaps certain pedagogical techniques and mathematics methods classes, which I've done, and I'm eager to do that, but I don't know how many math teachers at the middle school or high school level are going to pick up that journal and begin to kind of dig into my methodologies to somehow inform their lesson planning. And so I think that part of, again, our writing comes back to, again, this very healthy tension that Danny mentions about the extent to which we choose to make our writing accessible and impactful to others, and how we kind of, as perhaps, again, public intellectuals, work with and serve others who are not hanging out in certain, you know, spheres of, you know, of writing and of reading. Not that that's bad, but it's a different kind of place.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, you know, as you think about writing for different audiences, you know, there is that whole thing that Danny mentioned about just the baseline that you need for your career and to pay the bills and to keep your job and all of that. And that's obviously critically important, especially when you're starting out. But if you think about writing as for certain audiences, is basically what communities are you investing in? Who do you want to build relationships, right? And obviously it's very important to have relationships with your academic peers, but if you really care about other communities of practice, then you have to somehow, whether it's through speaking or writing, figure out a way to connect and communicate, right? And it is a zero-sum game, so you have to be selective, but you know, at the end of the day, it's like, who are my people? Who is my network? Who is going to support me in both, you know, the professional life, but also just, you know, social and, you know, finding meaning for my work? And those are the decisions that you need to make. And, you know, I think early on, it's probably, you know, your priority has to be on solidifying your professional base if you really want to be an academic. But if you think that there are other communities that eventually may support you both personally and professionally in the future, it's also worth investing in those, and it's very rewarding as well. You know, one of the things that it was sort of a big aha for me, because I had been, you know, pretty much doing straight academic writing, and then, you know, when we put out the digital youth book, a report, I guess, you know, it was the first time that the MacArthur Foundation supported us to do a really public press release, and I sat down with a communications team, and they put out talking points and blah, blah. And then, you know, we had done like 3 years of research and 15 case studies, and then they boiled it down to like 3 bullet points. Kids are learning online, and parents don't get it. Like, it was like, it was very interesting. And then when I was doing all the public outreach for it, you know, it'd be like, oh, we found this and we found that, and there were these genres, and it was very interesting. And then, you know, I'd get these nods, and then people, the journalists, were just like, okay, so what should we do about it? What's your opinion? What are the implications? Like the findings were whatever. It's like, you're a researcher, you figured stuff out. But it's really that what's in it for me question that, to me, that was a culture shift as an academic. I didn't realize that most people don't actually care what we found. They cared what we think. They care about our opinion of what should be different. And since then, you know, I've done a lot more sort of writing and speaking for non-academic audiences, and have just, like, nowadays when I give my talks, there's, you know, one story, one slide on data, and everything else is for them, like telling whether it's teachers or technology makers, you know, what are the implications of the work. And I think it really it keeps you honest, right, in some sense, to have, to be thinking about what value your research provides to others instead of just, you know, the geeking out about, you know, what's intellectually stimulating, which is great. You don't want to lose that, but it is also a really interesting exercise, I think, to think of your work from the point of view of others who might benefit from it.
I would add to that too. I mean, there's lots of opportunities to get in touch with those others. For me, I've started sharing some of the ideas that I'm working on. If I think it might be going to a practitioner audience or it has teacher implications, I've been trying to talk to my students about it because pre-service teachers are doing a lot of reading and a lot of observing, and they have really great ideas about the kinds of things that teachers need to know about right now. Another thing from my own career actually is a result of being in this crazy English department. Our English department is huge. It basically has 5 things that would be departments in other universities in it. And so I have pretty close contact with literature faculty and journalism faculty and composition faculty. And at first I was like, I don't really know how I fit in here, but then after a while I started to think, you know, actually I have a whole bunch of different people who I can talk to about these ideas and who are going to see it in a little bit of a different way. And so, like Mimi says, that reaching out, I think, is really important, and you can do that at many different phases of your work. That can be a water cooler conversation. That can be a, hey, I'm thinking about this thing. Could you look at a first draft? That could be, okay, I have this really interesting research finding, but I'm not sure how to express it. Can we just chat about it? And I would definitely encourage you to try to find those audiences, both at the end of the process in terms of finding journals and publishing in a variety of journals, but also throughout the process. For me, that's something that really keeps it energizing and keeps it interesting. Sometimes I'm really surprised, and that's good. So yeah, definitely.
So I would love to hear a little bit about how you would go about finding a publication, a target publication for an interdisciplinary piece. So say you're working on something that's, you know, a little bit outside of your expertise, or you've got, you know, several collaborators working in several disciplines. How do you find a place to publish? What are your strategies? Who do you talk to?
Well, I remember when I was starting out doing online ethnography, when there was like one other person in the world who did that. You know, nobody would publish it in any established journals. So our strategy was we did edited volumes. I mean, I would have to say, you know, I never, after a few tries at just publishing in established and disciplinary journals, I realized that this stuff was not gonna, you know, it wasn't worth the pain of trying to get it through the gauntlet there. So, you know, for the early part of my career, I only published in, you know, books. Like Routledge was doing a whole, you know, there were certain presses that were doing, that were interested in digital culture and so on. So I think that market may have changed since I was, you know, early in my career, but you know, there are, even if you consider something like a special issue of a journal versus like just sending a publication in cold to a journal, when you're trying to get new topics on the table or interdisciplinary topics that might not make it through a traditional review process, having that layer of kind of the editorial vision is often very helpful, even though obviously it's work to organize a group of people. But you know, these collective projects often have a lot of impact in setting a new kind of area of focus for interdisciplinary fields. So, you know, it can be also through panels and conferences. I remember, you know, our like digital studies and technology studies just kept getting rejected at the American Anthropological Associations, like year after year, like every rejection. And then finally, it's like somebody lobbied to get it put in as an invited session a featured session, which goes through a different kind of review process, and then after that, the floodgates open. So especially with new topics, it may require that extra level of you actually have to create your channel because it doesn't exist.
And
somewhat. Oh, Danny, please.
No, you go first. Your turn.
Sure, Danny, thanks. Very similar to what Mimi was just mentioning, I really love the special issue call, and there are a few that I see that I don't immediately try and call someone up or there's an ongoing project and say, let's first ask the editors a question, because inevitably a journal has a special issue call, and they're going to accept 6 or 7 chapters, maybe 8, and yet their list of potential topics is sometimes 20 or 30 topics long. And so the question becomes, how do your interests and how does any kind of current ongoing research project square with the expectations of typically special editors who've been brought in to move this special issue forward? And so I've always found it helpful to really kind of critically read those calls, to first reach out and ask some questions of those issue editors, and then to begin to shape an agenda that responds to that opportunity. And some of my most meaningful writing, both previously and actually forthcoming work, has been in response to special issues.
And I was just going to add that usually with my collaborators and I will sit down and we'll talk about the sorts of writing that we're doing, and do we know any journals in the field that are willing to take innovative pieces. So we actually have a discussion about where we might start. And then we typically do what both Mimi and Ramy were talking about. We'll send the editor, if we're not sure, we'll send the editor a short paragraph, usually with an abstract, an outline of what it is we're wanting to do, and see what sort of feedback we get. And if it's very clear that this is really not the sort of work that they're looking for, then we quickly shift gears. But we do that early on in the process. And what I'm careful to not do is email an editor too much, because I'm sure that would be overwhelming, and I would not get a good response. And I'm also careful to keep that pretty short, very direct. Okay, this is what we're thinking of. Even for a recent special issue, I had an editor who had asked if I would consider submitting something, which at all doesn't mean they're going to accept your work, of course. And it kind of said, what are you doing? I sent 3 abbreviated abstracts, 2 actually, and then the third one was, but this is the project I'm working on right now, which I think will be very interesting. It was about media production with gamers, basically, small study. It did not at all, in my opinion, fit the special issue, but it's very clear to me that that's the piece they would like me to submit. So even that was sort of interesting. So that was kind of an afterthought. Here's the 2 things I could get to you now because I'm nearly done with this, but that's not what they wanted. So that communication, I think people forget about that, or they're nervous to do that. You're much better off to do that versus waiting 4 months to get a rejection of what could be a good paper, but just not a good fit, but you interpreted it as a good fit.
Someone at a conference a couple years back said to me, don't forget that journal editors are people, and they like to hear from you a lot of times. I mean, I think Danny's right that you shouldn't necessarily email them a lot of times, but if you have an idea that could be beneficial for their journal, very frequently they'll enjoy hearing that from you. So to that end, there's a lot of conferences that have panels with journal editors or that have sessions with journal editors, professional development kinds of things. I have found those really, really useful in my career. One other tip that hasn't been mentioned yet is sometimes my collaborators and I just like to sit down and talk about who's doing the work that we think is really interesting. And if that person has a CV online, just take a look. And try to figure out, okay, so they're trying to build something around digital composition, and obviously there's more venues for that now than there used to be, but there still aren't very many venues. What are they doing? And if it's someone who I know well, sometimes it's easy to send an email, or sometimes you can just get a lot of information out of academia.edu or personal websites. So just to kind of take that audience analysis to another level. And sort of add a publication analysis on top of it, I think can be super useful, especially if you're doing something new that you're not quite sure where to put it.
All right, we've got about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to move us on to our last set of questions about sort of the writing and editorial process. So the first thing I want to ask about are, what are your strategies for improving and sustaining your writing? So what do you do to sort of keep yourself, keep yourself going and make sure that you're always improving your process.
I can quick.
Go ahead, Danny.
Well, first of all, writing is on my calendar for every week. I block off time for it every single week. I know everybody writes differently. Some people write every day. I don't do as well with that. I actually do well with big chunks of time. So for me, it tends to be a writing day, and if I miss my writing day, then I make it up on the weekend, which I hate to do, but that is part of my scheduled work week every week. And my pattern has been, if I do this chunk of time and I really get into the writing and get going, usually somewhere later on in the week, I'll do another 2 hours. So I don't do 2 6-hour blocks, but I'll do one 6-hour block of time where I might have a half an hour in there where I'm walking or taking a break, but I'm really focused on the writing. For me personally, that's about all I can sustain at one time. I can't write 8 or 10 or 12 hours. The other thing that I do is I have joined a writing group that we formed on campus that is different than some of the university-sponsored ones. It's scholars who are pre-tenure or close to tenure, or recently just got tenured at the associate level. And we call it Lean In. We support one another. We have just a Facebook page closed for our group. And every month, and we take turns facilitating this every month around the 15th. There's a paper exchange. You can be in or out, whatever you would like. You could do proposals for conferences, outlines, rough drafts, papers that you're revising, whatever it might be, but to encourage other people to keep writing. And we read one another's work, and you have 2 weeks to respond or get that paper back. So if you're in that particular month and there's 8 of you, there'll be 8 paper exchanges. There's only 4 of you, and so on. So that has really helped. And the other thing that I did the first couple of years that I was here, with other scholars, we did a writing retreat twice a year where we would go away for 3 days. And usually what happened at the end of it is that for me was a pretty nice manuscript, a draft of one. So every time I've gone on a writing retreat, I've eventually gotten that piece published because I've had so much focused time that this is what I'm going to do. So I mean, those are the things that have worked for me to get that trajectory going in the first three years.
I actually want to throw in, on top of the writing groups, I actually like having different kinds of writing groups. I have a writing group with junior colleagues here on campus where we're from all different fields, and it's more just we get together at a cafe or in the library conference room and just shut up and write. And that's an every week thing. And like Danny, I schedule that into my calendar, and I do my level best not to miss that one. And then I also have 2 different writing groups. Both are by Skype because they're global at this point. We're all over the place. But about once a month, I try to have a meeting with colleagues over Skype where we basically workshop a paper in person. We send it out probably 3 or 4 days before our writing group time, and then just spend probably an hour and a half going through the 2 papers for that particular month. And my writing group keeps me really, really sane in a lot of ways. I feel like with a lot of this stuff, it's very easy to, again, get into the mode where you're by yourself. There's nobody else. It's just you and your idea. And so for me, really sharing and showing up for other people and reading other people's work and having them read mine is unbelievably helpful. I think in terms of making time for daily writing, I know some people who schedule it by hours. I know folks who do like 6 to 8 every single morning, for instance. Personally, I like to schedule by words a little bit more because for me it's often helpful just to have some ideas down in the page, even if they're not particularly fantastic words. I try to write 500 of them, and that gets me started. So that, I think, is a process of just knowing yourself and figuring out what kind of goal helps to push you forward.
Oh my God, I am so impressed with how disciplined Alicia and Danny are. You mean you don't go by the, oh my God, it's a deadline and I have to stay up till 3 in the morning to finish this model.
Mimi, I do that too.
Okay.
Don't worry.
That's my mode. It's like, oh my God, oh my God.
Or I use my writing group as the deadline. So yeah.
I think I honestly have tried the scheduling and blocking out things, but the only thing that seems to work really consistently for me is if I'm writing with others and there's a deadline, and I'm just would feel so guilty if I didn't come through for my collaborators, and then it gets done. I find it's much harder to motivate when if you're missing those two factors: one, a hard deadline, and two, other people who would suffer if you let them down. So if you lack the discipline of what Danny and Alicia have described, that the collaborative part is actually, depending on your temperament, can be a motivator to get you to keep writing, I find.
Well, Mimi, you're going to probably not like it all what I'm about to say now. So folks on the panel know I'm a runner, and I have to run every day to keep myself healthy, and I approach my writing as if I am running. And there are different kinds of runs. I'm going to throw out the analogy here, right? You can go for like a shorter speed run. You can go for kind of a longer distance run. You can vary your tempo. And I plan my writing in the exact same kind of way. And so I look at my week, perhaps maybe like Danny does, and I say, well, when can I do my long writing? When can I do a short speed writing? And I'll go as far as, of course, bringing out a stopwatch. And I'll say, I'm going to write for 20 minutes and just 20 minutes. And I just need to kind of tackle this aspect of a theoretical framing. And I need to see if I can tackle that in this quick burst of 20 minutes of speed work, speed writing. And at other times, I know I've got that 3-hour block, and I know that it's like running a long half marathon or something on the weekends. I can take my time, I can slow my pace, and I can kind of set goals along the way. But having those two, my writing and my running, play off of one another has really helped me to keep my writing as an almost daily practice, and one that really fuels how I keep myself healthy in an academic sense, like I keep myself healthy in other ways.
I just want to mention that I cannot find my power cord in 20 minutes, so I give you a lot of credit if you can actually get some writing done, and I do know people who do that. The other last thing I'll say that probably seems obvious to people, but as an adult, again, who studies digital media environments, I have got to shut down all of the distractions. I am horrible if I can get on Facebook and Twitter, and I have too much going, so I shut off my work email and make sure that I won't check it, for 3 hours if I'm doing a long block. So, I mean, some of that really obvious stuff, that's really helped me to write smarter, not longer.
And I know yeah, please go ahead, Alicia.
I can't believe I forgot this. 2 years ago at the LRA conference, one of my colleagues who I write together with frequently and I decided that we were going to check in with each other once a week. And we were going to talk for just 20 minutes once a week about what our writing goals for that particular week were. It has changed my life. Sometimes it's support group. Sometimes it's, oh my God, I said I was going to do this and I don't know how I'm going to do this. Sometimes it's, okay, we have a deadline this week. When can we be online at the same time so we can bang it out at hopefully not 3 in the morning? But just being accountable to somebody besides me is also something that really, really helps. Sorry, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Oh, that's great. I think it's really useful to hear how you use other people as resources and structures like groups and timelines. I know that's really useful. For those who are interested in thinking about this topic more, I found the book How to Write a Lot really useful. I read it just before I started my dissertation writing, and there are chapters in there about blocking off time, setting goals, writing groups, and also things like apps and programs you can download. So for example, there are some apps where you can't pull up your Twitter or your chat applications unless you restart your computer as a sort of incentive to keep going, finish the writing, finish out what you're working on. There are also some that put your some of your distractions on timers, so you can't use them for certain periods of time. I want to go with one last question. I want to talk about something that maybe we don't hear about as much. I want to talk about being rejected for publications, sort of what your stories are, what your experiences are, and how you've moved forward after the rejection process.
I'd be happy to jump in. As I said already, like when I was early in my career and my work was so odd that I just kept getting rejected from the standard publication pipeline, and it's really hard not to take it personally and to think that the comments are actually wrong and they're just rejecting you because they don't get it or whatever. And that was definitely my response for my first rejections. I mean, I later developed a better strategy so I could fit my work into the context better. But I think, you know, there's a couple things. One is you do have to be strategic so that you're reaching the right audience and you're getting in a context where you're going to grow and actually get published. But the other thing that I've sort of come to realize much later was that they were actually right, and you have to kind of embrace the pain of harsh criticism if you want to grow. Like, I used to do a lot of Zen training when I was younger, and when some Zen temples, when you're like sitting there and you start nodding off, they come up with you and just hit you with a stick, and then you say, thank you. And it's painful, right? Like, it is painful. Like, you have to just realize that it's an emotional and painful process to get harsh criticism and to be rejected. But as you get further along in your career, it actually gets harder and harder to get meaningful feedback and criticism. And so now I just appreciate it so much when somebody really tells me what's wrong. And I remember one of my advisors was really into the technicalities of writing, and he would just go through and like cut out erroneous thes and little things and just really picky, and kind of, it was sort of irritating. But then looking back on it, I'm just so appreciative that I had people who were really gonna, you know, tell me what was up. And I think if you can get into the mindset where those rejections and that harsh criticism is actually an opportunity for you to really look yourself at your own writing and not be defensive, then it really is. I know it sounds trite, but it is a growth opportunity.
I also do the, you want to go first? Oh, I also do the 3 strikes and you're out. So Constance, who was my advisor, basically said to me, rejection is part of the game, get used to it, kind of develop a thick skin. And I think it was important for me to even hear that, and a lot of folks in grad school aren't aware that people who have extensive, fabulous career who are well regarded still get rejections, especially when it's truly blind review, right? And so to hear that, just to hear that everybody's going to get rejected and that's going to continue, I really started to try to internalize that. And I do live by the rule that if I've started with a particular journal and it's a flat-out rejection, it's certainly not a dead piece. It's not dead until I've really looked at the reviews critically, if it made sense. And I will tell you, 85% of the time, I think the reviewers are dead on. Occasionally I disagree with it, but not often. And then really try to look at that and revise the paper accordingly and send it to a different venue if that's the case. And don't put the paper away. I allow myself to put the paper away for a week or 10 days because it is kind of painful, but then pull it back out. And usually what the reviewers have asked for isn't nearly as horrendous as what I think it is the first time I read it, because the words do feel so harsh. So there's that piece. And the other thing that's helpful for me, I need to tell somebody. I've realized when I hang on to a rejection, doesn't mean I have to call or post it on Facebook, but there's a colleague who's a friend of mine. It really helps for me, and we're in different fields, for me to say to her, wow, I completely blew it with this paper. And then sometimes we'll even laugh about what the reviewers have said, even though it can be really accurate. So that, for me, I need a little processing, and then I get back to it, and I do try to make those revisions, and I do resubmit. Right now I have, this might not be the case for a while, but I don't have any papers that haven't been published that I've written, and some of the papers, one in particular, I had 2 brutal rejections to the point where I was on the 3rd strike, and if this one it was going to be a dead paper. I was just so done with it. So I do think that's helpful. If I've written a piece, I want it published somewhere, and that's what I try to work towards.
I would, again, only add to what Danny has mentioned. I had a conversation with a colleague recently who said that this particular journal in the field of math teacher education has kind of its own institutional culture. The journal itself typically rejects manuscripts twice before providing authors with an opportunity to really say, okay, we're going to move forward with this piece. And the nature of rejection there can be interpreted as an invitation to do some serious work, but continue to work with the editors to move that piece forward. And so knowing that rejections are, again, perhaps just one point in the process, and even finding out if the venue is expecting to carry that conversation forward is really critical to not thinking of rejection as a hard stop.
This can also be another good time when, if there's something in there that you really don't understand in your feedback, it might be worthwhile to show it to a senior colleague or even to ask the editors if you're just completely mystified. Rejection is really, really hard. I got a paper rejected last week after 2 resubmissions, and at the moment, I really don't want to pick it up again. And so I'm right in the place where I went to one of my senior colleagues. I ran into him in the hall just the other day, and I said, okay, I'm in a really bad spot with this particular one. Would you be willing to look at it and just like give me a fresh pair of eyes? I can't do it yet. I said, I can't do it yet. Maybe by the time grades are in, I'll be ready to look at it again. But yeah, just to echo what everyone else has said about processing and analysis and trying to find a way to move forward, as long as you feel like the piece is still doing something for you. I mean, if you hate it and it's a disaster and it makes you want to die every time you look at it, then yeah, maybe it's time to put that one away and not make yourself deal with it. But if you still feel like it's important and you still want to try and find a home for it, that's doable, and the feedback will be useful, because there's all kinds of readers out there, and you've got those reviews, which are windows into how people are seeing your work.
All right, that's wonderful. I think we've heard from everyone. We only have a couple minutes left, and I know Crystle has some closing remarks to end with. I'm not really sure we have time. I guess there is one quick question from the Etherpad. So if one or two of you want to weigh in very briefly, somebody asked if you have any recommended tools or environments when you're writing collaboratively. So what you use in terms of software or technology. So if a couple of you could share about that, and then I think we'll let Crystle wrap us up.
I use Google Docs. I write with people all over the world, and it's so nice to have revision history and comments and just a place where it can be that isn't 14 locations on my computer.
I do the same thing. So do the same thing, and then we take it offline when we format.
Yep, same here. Google Docs is great.
Agreed. I don't know how we did this before GDocs.
All right. Pretty unanimous consensus there. So writing collaboratively, use Google Docs. Crystle, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, we'd like to thank Alecia, Danny, Mimi, and Ramy for participating in our discussion today, as well as all of you watching and participating on Twitter and the Etherpad. And we'd also like to thank Jameson for his help with the Hangout. Next week our unit continues, and we're going to ask all of you who are watching for help. Amanda and I are going to answer any questions you have, whether they came out of this week's discussion or others just in general about writing. So put them in the Etherpad or tweet them to the DML Commons hashtag, and we will try to answer anything you've got. So if you want to keep up to date with what's going on in the DML Commons, sign up for the newsletter at dmlcommons.net or watch the hashtag for DML Commons on Twitter. And the next webinar for this unit is Friday, May 15th at 10 a.m. Pacific, and we look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Great talking.